Hey, thanks for watching this video. My name's Andrew and I'm the lead pastor here at Calvary, and before you get to this message, I just want to thank you for being here. Thanks for taking some time to connect with us. If you'd like more information about Calvary, please do reach out. The easiest way to get in touch with us is to jump on our website, calvarygospel.ca, and hit the I'm New tab. That will take you to a connect card where you can ask your questions, maybe you have prayer requests, or you just want to introduce yourself. And by the way, we have our in-person services happening again, so we'd love a chance to meet you in person. But until then, we hope you enjoy this video. Well, is anyone else just starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable being a Christian in our culture? I'll admit it, as a pastor, it's definitely getting to a point where I'm a little bit uncomfortable. And I'll just say, I face like 1% of what many pastors around the world are facing. I don't have it near as bad as many people do have it. But how about you? I'm wondering if you're starting to feel that tension where, maybe you don't feel like people resist you or attack you for your faith. But there's an unwritten rule around your workplace, around the job site, at school, maybe even with your family, that Christians, this Christian idea, it's just not welcome here. Christians, aren't they the ones who dehumanize people with their sexual ethics? Aren't they the ones who always claim they have objective authority? They're always trying to tell other people how to live their lives. And maybe you even had it where somebody in your life, somebody that you care about, has actually gone after you about what you believe. Has started to ask you questions. What gives you the right to tell me how to live my life? Have you ever been there? What the Christians and their thoughts on authority and telling us God wants us to do such and such and such, what gives them the right? What happens when people start to question our faith? Or let me be a little more specific. What happens when humans start to challenge Jesus' authority? I think for most of us, if that conversation that we just described happened to us, what happens is we back off before things get embarrassing or they even get worse. And I really believe there's at least two types of people in the room and online this morning, and maybe there's more than that, but two for sure. And one is, you'd admit it. Yeah, I've been there before, and the truth is, as much as I would like to be different, when these conversations come up, I sort of just slouch back and I decide I just need to avoid embarrassment. I don't want to get trumped in an argument. I don't want to get blasted, so I'm just done with it. But then there's another type of person, and you're the one who asks a lot of these questions. You might describe yourself as a skeptic, or maybe you wouldn't use that word, but you would just say faith, God, religion. I'm just not sure how I feel about it. And you would ask those questions. What gives God the right? Why do Christians always try to tell other people how to live their life? Why do they say they're the only right ones? How are they so intolerant? And you've had some of these questions, and as you wrestle with them, it just makes you angrier and angrier with God. And I just want to tell you, if that's you this morning, I'm so thankful that you joined us. And you're not alone. Everyone else that you see in this room this morning, they've wrestled with some of those same doubts. I've wrestled with some of those same doubts. But what do we do with this? How do we respond when people challenge Jesus' authority? This morning, I want to take you to a story where that exact scene happens. Luke chapter 20, you can turn there now. If you didn't bring a Bible, if you don't have your own Bible with you, you could even on your phone open the YouVersion app or download the YouVersion app, search Luke 20, you'll be right there with us. And I'll just, don't worry being on your phone. I know that you're just reading the Bible, you're not scrolling Facebook or whatever, right? You're with us, I know. But Luke chapter 20, what happens here is that Jesus is having a conversation with some of his opponents, and it's getting uncomfortable. Okay, uncomfortable is a bit of an understatement. It's getting downright heated. It's kind of like somebody raises their voice at the dinner table, and now the rest of us don't know what to do. We're just sort of awkwardly looking down at our plate because things got awkward. That's the type of conversation Jesus finds himself in. And we've been in this series, just in case you've been away this summer or you're just joining us, we've been in this series called Why Do You Ask? We're looking at some of the questions that Jesus asked his followers, asked the people around him. And this morning we are getting to the pinnacle of questions because Jesus has questions fired at him. Then Jesus fires questions back. And we have this amazing back and forth between Jesus and some of his opponents. And so why don't we just pick up the story and we can look at it ourselves. Luke 20, these religious leaders, the story tells us the chief priests in verse 1, the teachers of the law, together with the elders, they decide that they've had enough with Jesus. You see, if you've been watching and listening to any of our stories so far this summer, Jesus is always avoiding attention. He doesn't want people to know who he is just yet so that a riot doesn't start and he doesn't get crowned king the way he doesn't want to be crowned king. But this time, Jesus isn't avoiding attention. The story in Luke 20 happens within the last week of Jesus' life, and he has just ridden into town as king. He set himself up as king of the Jews. And then on this particular event, he is sitting in the temple and he's teaching people as if he's some sort of rabbi, as if he's a priest in the temple. And the religious leaders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, the elder, this is a mixed bag of Israel's leaders, and they can't get along about anything. But they're so furious that this guy who has no credentials, who's never been to school, who's never been born into a family like ours that has all the status that deserves to teach people in the temple, this guy is teaching in our temple. And they can't agree on anything, but the one thing that they agree on is that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they team up, and they devise a scheme, and they say, we need to get rid of this guy because he is not going to be good for any of our influence. We're losing our power. We're losing the people, and we need the people because if we have the people, we have the power. And so they think of a scheme, and it's a good scheme. It's a really good scheme. Verse 2, they ask Jesus this question. They say, tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority? And what they're trying to do here, they're trying to trap Jesus. They're trying to basically get him in front of the people to admit, I don't have any authority. They're trying to shame him and show these people who really, they're so gullible. They'll believe anyone who's a persuasive teacher. They're trying to make Jesus look bad in front of the people. Who gave you this authority? Basically, where are your credentials? Show us. Let me see the email signature. Do you have any letters behind there? PhD? No, you don't even have a doctorate of ministry? You didn't even go to Bible college? How could you possibly be teaching these people? And if Jesus really wanted, what he could have done is just pulled out his ID and be like, you see that? You see that name right there? G-O-D. But he didn't do that this time. He wanted to teach them a lesson. And he wanted to teach all the people listening to them in the temple that day a lesson. And so, Jesus, with the finesse that only Jesus can possess, Jesus answers their question with a question. You've heard him do that before, right? He says, okay, I will ask you a question. John's baptism. From heaven or from humans? Jesus spins it on them. Jesus gets out of their trap, and he does it so well that he's now left these religious leaders in a predicament. Because John's baptism, that's a reference for John's whole ministry. And John the Baptist, if you know about him, all the people believed he was a prophet because he came preaching and he talked about, I'm preparing the way for the one to come. And he eventually said, the one to come is Jesus. So now Jesus is hitching his ministry to John the Baptist. And he's put the religious leaders in a difficult spot because all the people love John. And what Jesus is trying to do is force out the fact that these religious leaders, they did not like John, because John also challenged their authority. In fact, eventually the way John dies is because King Herod puts him to death at the request of his immoral, horrible wife, who he shouldn't have even had in the first place. And so now Jesus has these guys cornered. And so they get together like a huddle, like on those trivia shows that you see when the team gets together and tries to figure out their answer. And they say to themselves, well, if we say that his baptism, John's baptism, is from heaven, he's going to ask, why didn't we believe him? But if we say John's baptism is of human origins, these people are going to stone us. They'll kill us. Jesus is trying to show you guys are being hypocrites. He's going for their hearts. He's trying to get them to believe, I am the one you should trust. I am the authority you should trust. But they refuse. Instead, they say, we can't, he's got us. We can't answer him. And so they say, we don't know. We don't know where John's baptism came from. Verse 7 of chapter 20. And Jesus said, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. If you're not going to just soften your heart and admit that you know exactly where I'm getting this authority, then I'm not going to tell you. But Jesus doesn't just stop there. Now Jesus goes on the offensive. In verse 9 through 16, Jesus tells a little story. He says, hey, and he's talking to all the people, but the religious leaders are right there. A man planted a vineyard. We've heard this story before. That's how all the good stories start. A man planted a vineyard, and then he rented it to some farmers and went away for a while. When it was time for harvest, he sent a servant to collect some of the fruit. That was common practice back in the day if you owned a vineyard. But the farmers beat the servant and sent him away. The man thought, hey, that's weird. I wonder what happened there. So he sends another servant. They beat him, they shame him, and they send him away. So the man sends a third servant. You know where this is going, don't you? Same thing. So the man's at a loss. He doesn't know what to do. He says, maybe, just maybe, if I would send my son, whom I love, maybe they'll listen to him. So he sends his son. But as they see the son coming, they say, that's the heir. If we get rid of him, we can have the whole inheritance. And so they beat him, and they throw him out, and they kill him. And then Jesus asked this question. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and he will kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Wow. Israel's leaders are furious when they hear Jesus tell this story. They're livid. They can't believe it because they know Jesus is talking about them. And multiple times in the story, Luke tells us, chapter 19, verse 47, chapter 22, verse 2, Luke says they were looking for a way to destroy Jesus. They were looking for a way to kill him because they just had enough. But verse 19, they were afraid of the people. They know the people love him. They know that they're eating up Jesus' every word, and so they don't do anything. Instead, verse 20, keeping a close watch on him, they sent spies who pretended to be sincere. They now have Jesus under video surveillance. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said so that he might be handed over to the power and authority of the governor. So the spies questioned him. They said, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." They ask him another question. Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar? Once again, they think that they have Jesus trapped. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar? Basically, they put Jesus on the spot. They say, do you obey this ruling authority, our overlords, the Romans? If Jesus says no, he's an insurrectionist. He's a rebel against Rome. But if Jesus says yes, all these followers he has, all these people who are hanging on his every word are going to leave him. They're going to say, you sellout, you gave in to Rome. How dare you? They've got him. It was a nice try, Jesus. We did our best. You had a good run. It's over, right? Wrong. This is Jesus we're talking about. He gives the greatest answer possibly ever to a question. People have talked about this answer since that day. And what does he do? He says, guys, give me a denarius, the coin of the day, which they had. And then he says, whose image is on that? They're thinking, that's a bit of a rhetorical question. Caesar's. Well, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's. In those days, whoever's inscription was on the coin was believed to own that coin. And so Jesus just says, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. And then, this isn't actually in the story, but I picture it going down this way. I think Jesus took the coin after that and just flipped it up at the guys, and they catch it. But as they're going to put it back in their tunic or whatever they were wearing that day, Jesus adds this line. Oh, by the way, give to God what is God's. Pure silence. Except for the crowd, they were probably like, oh, what a line. Like, if he flipped that coin and it hit the ground, all of Jerusalem would have heard it that day. What a line. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. What's Jesus saying there? He's saying, I am so sick of Israel's leaders abusing these people, abusing this temple. You've got your tradition, you've got your rituals, you're selling all your t-shirts and your merchandise, and you've got the coolest fans in the world. You're making this temple a mockery. You're making Israel's worship a mockery. Give God his temple back. But he's saying even more than that. He's saying, give God your life. Give God your heart. Quit resisting me. Quit resisting the way God told you it was supposed to be. Give God your heart. And that message, that lesson hasn't changed too much today. The biggest threat that these religious leaders felt about Jesus, the biggest thing he was challenging, he was going to take their authority. No longer did they get to run Israel's religious system the way that they wanted. No longer did they get free reign. Sure, there was the Romans and they were the overlords, but as long as Israel didn't challenge Rome's laws, the leaders could do whatever they wanted. And Jesus was encroaching upon their authority. Even further, Jesus was disrupting their autonomy. He was telling them how to live their lives. Ravi Zacharias, the late and beloved Ravi Zacharias, he was so famous for the way that he talked about this passage. Because he says, if these guys would have been thinking, they would have said, whose image is on me? Or sorry, they would have said, what is God's? And then Jesus would have answered, well, whose image is on you? And Ravi just talks, the way that he talks about God's image in your life is beautiful, as only Ravi can do, right? But the whole point is that we, as humans, were created in God's image. And the way that we find that story out, you go back to the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. We get the story of creation as told by Moses in days 1 through 6. There's light, there's sky, there's seas, there's vegetation, there's creatures. And after God makes all of these things, what does he say at the end of each day? It's good. It's good. And then God makes humans. His direct quote, let us make mankind. Let us make humankind in our own image. And what does God say at the end of that last day? It's very good. It's very good. You see, God created each one of us. Whether you believe it or not, God created us to bear his image. The most fulfilled you could ever be is when you enjoy God. When you understand that your purpose was to enjoy God, you get what your life is about. Being made in God's image means that we have a self-awareness that none of the other creatures have. We can think like God. We're actually his agents. We do his work in this world. And it also means that we have dignity to us. Each and every human that's ever been made has a dignity and a value because they were made in God's image. And that's why, as Christians, we do fight for the lives of unborn babies, because we think they have so much value. But you know what else we do as Christians? We fight for the lives of that young woman who's about to have a baby and has no idea what to do with it, who thinks her only choice is abortion. We fight for her life too. That's why we agree that Black Lives Matter. And we also stand up for other people who are marginalized, who are in poverty, who aren't being treated the way that they should be treated. Because we deep down believe, because the very start of this book tells us, Moses told his people straight from God, you were created with worth. You were created with dignity. But somewhere along the way, and it didn't take long, if you know the story, you know it didn't take long, we took that human dignity, we took that self-awareness, and we tried to turn it into entitlement, into autonomy. Because Genesis 3 tells the story. And remember how the story was told. Satan convinces the woman, no, God doesn't want you to eat from that tree, because when you eat from the tree, you're going to become like him. You're going to become like him. And when the woman saw that she could gain knowledge in this way, gain wisdom in this way, she ate the fruit. She sinned. Our very first sin is that we wanted to be like God, isn't it? Pride. Autonomy. And it's not just way back when. These religious leaders had the same thing going on. When Jesus, when the God of the world comes into the scene to say, hey, I'm coming back to claim my temple and my people and a whole world of people who need to believe in me. They say, wait a minute, he's infringing on my authority. He's getting in the way of my autonomy. And since those days, as we continue through history, our biggest problem has been that we think we're entitled to whatever we want. We think we could do a better job than God. We say, God, I know you got a lot of things on your plate right now. I bet you if I was in charge, here's how I would do it, and it would be so much better. You maybe have never said that out loud because you'd sound like a quack. But we think it each and every day when we live our lives however we want. Autonomy. It's the heart of this passage. The thing that keeps us from giving Jesus authority. The thing that we struggle with is autonomy. Back to that Ravi illustration. I butchered the first part, but I'll get better on this next part that he says, okay? Ravi goes on to tell the story of Muhammad Ali. Maybe you've heard this story. Muhammad Ali, for the young people in the room who never saw him, he was a famous boxer, passed away a few years ago. Muhammad Ali, the story goes, he was on a plane, and they said, please put your seatbelts on. The seatbelt sign comes on. Everyone complies and starts putting their seatbelts on, but not Muhammad. So the stewardess comes up to Muhammad and says, hey, sir, you need to put your seatbelt on. To which Muhammad replies, Superman don't need no seatbelt. And the stewardess doesn't miss a beat. She says, Superman don't need no plane. I have a feeling that some of us in this room, the tension that we have with God, the struggle that we have with religion, with Jesus, with faith, is we just say to ourselves, I can't believe in a God who just tells me how I'm supposed to live my life, who says either obey me, either follow me, either love me, or die. I can't believe in some book, in some Bible that just a whole bunch of people put together, and now I'm supposed to think that's objective truth. How am I supposed to believe in that? I can't deal in my head with the thought that either God is all-powerful and he doesn't care about all the suffering going on around us, or he cares, he's all-loving, and he just can't do anything about it. What am I supposed to do with that kind of God? But I wonder if your deeper question, if the thing that you're wrestling with even deeper, is you just don't want to give God the right. You say, what gives God the right Why does God get to be the boss of me, but you just don't want to give up your own autonomy? I wonder if that's what we're wrestling with today. And all these doubts that you have, all these frustrations that you have, the fact that you just don't want to believe in God, it stems down to you don't want him to be right. Because if he is right, and if this thing is true, and if he does require your life, that means you don't get to be in control anymore. But think about it. If God truly did make us, if he really is our creator, and go with me on this one for a second, then the Bible isn't just some book that tells us how to live our lives. The Bible, it's really his story. And it's not just a whole bunch of people who wrote this story. It's God who inspired people to write this story. And as you read this book, what you learn from the story is that when it looked like sheer chaos, when it looked like people were done, God sends his own son, Jesus. And Jesus comes into the world and he shows people how to have a relationship with God. And he explains this book for people. And he helps people get back to God. But on his way, he has this conversation with some religious leaders. And he says, give to God what is God's. Give God what you owe him. Give God your life. And if he really is our maker, our manufacturer, and just like any other maker, when you see the thing that you've created goes wrong, you fix it. And that's what God is doing when he sends Jesus. Just like any parent, any good parent, when your children disobey, there are consequences. And you can use all the bleach in the world, but you're not going to be able to erase the fact that when you check your tag, right there, God, just like a really good stylish brand person, God's image is on you. But if you never choose to believe that, if you never give him the authority that he believes, there are consequences. That story of the tenants, that horrible ending where Jesus says, isn't he going to come back? And he's going to punish them. He says he's going to kill them. The people respond to that story in verse 16. When the people heard this, they said, God forbid. Like, I don't even believe what I'm hearing. That couldn't happen. And Jesus looked right at them. And he asked, then what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. Jesus is sending out a warning. God doesn't want to punish you. God's given you lots of warnings. He's not just some God who wants to beat you into loving him, but he is like a perfect parent. And he says, if you're not going to listen to me, if you're not going to turn around, there is going to come a day where you will be punished. We truly do believe there's a real place called hell. And it's where people who never put their faith go. It's designed for Satan, who was the first to rebel against God. But it's going to be where all people who rebel against God go. And Jesus came so that you didn't have to go there. Jesus came, if you read the rest of the story, it gets into all how the end of the world goes. Chapter 20 and chapter 21. Jesus is coming back. And he's coming back to reign. And Paul tells us, Philippians 2, that every knee is going to bow down to him. Every tongue is going to confess him. But first, before that end time comes, God is being patient. And he's waiting. And he just wants you to know how much he loves you. He wants you to turn to him, to stop trying to be your own governor of your own life. And I know I've focused in on a while for those who might be skeptical about the faith, because it's so important that you get this. We're not a church that hates people. We're not a church that likes preaching this fire message of you're going to hell. But we do want you to know it's a reality. And with everything in my heart, please hear me. I don't want that for you. God loves you way too much to abandon you to that fate. He doesn't want that for you. So if you don't do anything else today, just believe in Jesus. Believe that message. Talk to him. Wrestle with it. Say, God, here's all my questions. Here's what frustrates me about how things work. Would you please help me to have faith? Take some time. That's a real thing that you should deal with. But for the rest of us in the room who are like, he hasn't talked to me in about 10 minutes, this autonomy issue, it doesn't go away when you become a Christian. Because so many of us, we say that prayer, we believe in Jesus. I believe you died for me. I believe you rose again. Thank you for saving me. I got my get out of hell card. And then we live our lives however we want. We basically go back to autonomy, don't we? Or we say, Jesus, thank you for your forgiveness. Oh, it's so good to be forgiven for my sins. And then we refuse to forgive anyone else their sins. Anytime somebody wrongs us, we say, how dare you? Oh, I'm going to get you. And Jesus' warning is for us as well. He says, beware, end of chapter 20, beware of these religious leaders. Don't act like them. Don't have this faith, this facade that everything's good to go. But really deep down, your heart isn't for me. You're not living for me. Jesus wants us to hear this message about autonomy too. And then, so kind of to summarize, the big thing that Jesus is saying is give God your life. Give God your life, surrender it all to him, and keep surrendering it all to him. But there is a second point, and some of you thought this was what the whole message would be about this morning. Give God your life. Give the government your respect. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Jesus does finish with that line. He includes it in there. And honestly, we could open a can of worms and we could be here till like 3 o'clock, but I know some of you want to get to lunch, and a whole bunch of you just got really uncomfortable that I'm bringing this up. But I really don't think that Jesus is trying to get into the political game here. I don't think Jesus had these notions of taking over Rome and being some political leader. I don't even think he really wanted to take over Israel in the way Israel had envisioned. He's saying, hey, I'm God, I've come back, I'm establishing a heavenly kingdom, and I want you to follow that kingdom. But the whole political game, the whole government game, just give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And so, what do we as Christians do with this passage? Well, guys like Paul in Romans 13, Peter in 1 Peter 2, they give us a bit of a commentary on this. And what they tell us to do is, anywhere possible, respect your government. Listen to the government wherever you can. We want to obey them. We want to be the people in the world known for loving others, for following the rules, for being good for our community. But what they'd also warn you, and what stories like Acts chapter 4 where the apostles are getting attacked, what we also need to realize is don't be surprised if there comes a day when culture, when the government, when institutions, when policies start to speak against Christians. Don't be surprised if there comes a day when the tension is made to you, is put on you. Do I obey God or do I obey government? And I just want to be very clear. I don't think today is that day. I don't think some of the restrictions that have gone on with COVID-19 here in Ontario, this is my personal opinion, I don't think we're at that point yet. But I do think there are places all over the world that are at that point. I think there are Christians since the day that Jesus said that who have had to fight for their liberty, for their right to worship God. I look at the situation in California, where they're trying to make laws out there against churches. Yeah, maybe you've read John MacArthur's statement from his church, Grace Baptist Church. There are churches that are facing this. There are places where Christians are persecuted all over the world. There's even policies that are starting to make Christians targets. Think about what happened with Redeemer this week. Maybe you saw the article in the CBC. Or Trinity Western when they tried to start a law school. The whole point is don't be surprised if there comes a day that we're hated for our faith. Just don't make our attitudes, don't make our disrespect and losing out on the fact that we believe everyone was created in God's image. Don't make that the reason people hate us for our faith. I know that some of us in this room believe there are conspiracy theories, and you think that the government has devised this whole thing to get us. I know some people honestly think that. But we've got to do everything possible to obey our government to the point that they tell us to disobey God. And we have to wrestle with that. It should feel uncomfortable because it is uncomfortable. But when you feel that pressure and that tension, thank God that it doesn't demand our lives right now. Because for Jesus, he goes up against his opponents. He challenges their authority. And guess what happens before he is vindicated, before he wins? He dies. He gets killed. This seals the deal. It puts the nail in the coffin that eventually leads to the nail on the cross. These guys end up hating Jesus, and they put him to death. But remember what he told his followers. He said, trouble is coming. If they did this to me, they'll do it to you. But take heart. In this world, you'll have trouble, but I have overcome the world. You see, the reason that we have this tension inside of us, the reason why we don't really know how to wrestle with these things is because we aren't citizens of this world only. We're participants in this world, and we should contribute to politics. We should weigh in the marketplace and in the public squares. But our citizenship is in heaven. We're part of a nation that Jesus established when he won the victory on that cross. We're part of his Christian nation. And there's coming a day where he's going to establish his kingdom once and for all. And until that day, we wait. And we wrestle with, how do we have an influence on our culture? How do we contribute to our culture in the most positive way that we can? Well, knowing they may never agree with us, and they may start to hate us for it. It's a tough question, isn't it? But going back to Ravi's question, going back to Jesus' implied question, whose image is on you? When they shine up the coin of your life, and you start to look in the reflection, who do you see? Who do they see? Is it Jesus? Or is it you? Give to God what's God's. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the time that we have had this morning to open your word, and I know it's an uncomfortable conversation. I was looking for a way not to preach this week, but I believe that you wanted us to hear it, and even if there were things that were just Andrew and not you, I pray that you would speak to people's hearts and show them exactly how they need to apply this passage. Like the Bereans in Acts, I pray that we would be people who test what is said against your word and who make sure that it's the truth that we're teaching. But Lord, I pray that all of us wouldn't leave today. We wouldn't let this week happen without really wrestling with this. Who's in control of our lives? Who's the boss? I pray if there's anyone in this room or if there's anyone online this morning who's never truly just surrendered control to Jesus, I pray they wouldn't just feel beaten into that today, but they would realize it's out of your love, it's out of your mercy, it's out of your patience that you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait for there to be consequences, for there to be punishment. And so, Lord, I pray they see your love and that you are totally worthy and holy, and you deserve all of our respect, all of our reverence, all of our worship. For those of us in the room who are doing our best to follow you in confusing days, give us the courage as Christ had this perfect courage and obedience to you. Help us to know that if we went through the worst thing possible in this world, it couldn't compare to the glory and to the splendor and to eternal life with you, praising your name. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for his example and for his sacrifice. We love you and we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.